Now, I'm not saying Iron Maidens aren't fun, but you know what's more fun? A good old-fashioned heist story. In space, no less. There's an MMORPG called EVE Online, and here all your space fantasies can come true. Design your own ship from the ground up, hop from planet to planet, or in this case, pull a heist on one of the biggest space banks of 2006 and make off with $170,000 of in-game currency. If the infinite starry expanse is where you wish to live out your life as a space pirate, a space engineer, a space navigator, a space etc., then EVE Online is the game for you. But be warned, EVE Online's initial learning curve is so steep you need to be a space mountain climber to get over it. This is a game for people who want another thankless full-time job to match the first, or who think their creative arts degree is getting lonely and could use another equally useless degree to keep it company. There's a lot of grinding, a lot of wikis, and a lot of competition to live out that space dream of yours. The good news is there are no rules in space. So long as you're not hacking or exploiting bugs, you are free to pull yourself up from the bootstraps as you see fit. For many, that dream is realized one mind resource at a time, slowly but surely, until you've saved up enough interstellar credit to craft your own spaceship. Good space luck with that. You'll be hard-pressed to find resources that haven't been claimed by one of the many space corporations fighting for control, backed up by a big enough fleet to keep space highwaymen from stealing their bootstraps. Regardless, space money, like real money, needs to be kept somewhere safe. Callie wasn't the name given to him by his parents, but it was the name he went by while working as the CEO of the EIB in EVE Online. Short for the EVE Intergalactic Bank, the EIB operated like a typical space bank. Players deposited their in-game money, the EIB used their money to invest into different projects or loans, and then paid back the players with interest. It was a novel idea in 2006, but there were enough smaller scams at the time to justify the suspicious looks Callie was getting. Here's this guy, seemingly appearing from nowhere, putting forward $100 million of his own interstellar credits to loan out to players with a handsome interest rate in return. As the saying goes, a space fool and his money are soon parted. One player in particular had a nose for sniffing out scams, an alleged con man in his own right. He played the role of space detective and went rummaging through Callie's affairs looking for dirty laundry. The detective pressed for proof of EIB's legitimacy, practically audited the bank with how many questions he had. Answers were given, screenshots were shared, but the investigation had to be put on hold as Callie was injured in a bus crash. Unfortunate and untimely, or just the distraction that Callie needed. People were growing suspicious enough to break the barrier between video gaming and the real world. They cracked out magnifying glasses and conducted their own internet sleuthing into his real life. They scoured the web for news of the accident and found one that fit the bill. Callie's story seemed to check out, but the detective wasn't convinced. On a hunch, he called the hospital and found no person of Callie's description had been admitted. Obviously, hospitals can't gossip patient details to cold callers, but enough was given to make Callie's accident look more like a convenient fabrication. The detective dropped the subtleties and went straight to the source. He called Callie, using a number he had provided during one of many email interrogations. A man named Peter answered the phone. Rugged and slurred, like a hungover boatman who'd been kicked awake, Peter couldn't make head or tail of the space detective's questioning. The detective asked him about Callie and the EVE Intergalactic Bank, but the confused gentleman on the other end wasn't having any of it. He knew no EVE Intergalactic Bank, and he knew no CEO named Callie who run it. What luck! This brash character had given the detective all he needed to bring the EIB down and Callie with it. The further questioning took a hammer to the detective's hopes. As it turned out, Peter was a caretaker in the service of a man who had been in a bus crash. A man who spent an inordinate amount of time in his room playing a game called EVE Online, or something like that. The detective had hit another dead end. He retreated for the time being with his tail tucked between his legs. Callie returned days later to run the EIB. For months, the community was split, with one camp calling the detective out for pushing things too far into the realm of the personal. Others thought the detective hadn't gone far enough, as back then interstellar credits could be traded for real-world money. Paranoia grew. It was difficult to differentiate fact from rumor, and Callie's routine disappearances were only stoking the flames. The detective dug deep for anything he could find. Callie was willing to help, but frequently claimed he had trouble logging on from time to time. The detective dug deeper still. The staffers of the EIB were interrogated. No one seemed to have their stories straight. To some, Callie was a chronically ill angel investor. To others, Callie was a high roller with a temper, constantly getting into public fights and getting locked up in real life. Yet despite the polarizing reputation, the bank was steadily growing and handling everyone's money with the utmost care. Then one day, the EIB made a major announcement. Callie had been missing longer than usual without checking in with one of the staffers. Concerned, they called Callie's home, where a somber Peter delivered the news. Callie had passed away. It was a tough time for everyone, but the bank needed to continue moving forward from what Callie built for the good of the community. The chief operations officer sprang to the steering wheel. The detective, torn between sympathy and skepticism, demanded more information. He had already spent months piecing together the enigma that was Callie. He knew even less about the new CEO of the EIB. Better to deal with the space devil you kind of know than the one you don't. The detective got in the new CEO's face and demanded he answer to an audit, similar to the one he gave Callie. The new guy's record-keeping was pristine, but something felt off this time around. The detective scoured through his personal emails and cross-referenced the new ones with the old ones Callie had provided. The new records didn't match the old ones. The detective had finally found something. But at that moment, the EVE Online community had bigger problems. The EIB had been completely drained of all of its resources. 800 billion interstellar credits, $170,000 worth of in-game currency disappeared from the bank. The detective stormed the EIB looking for the new CEO. The new CEO tossed him aside. Had he not been dealing with the detective's relentless auditing, maybe the bank wouldn't have been vulnerable to theft. Everyone was so focused on the EIB that no one could blame them for not noticing the massive spaceship floating into open space at that very moment. It was a marvel of engineering. Every last square inch was reinforced, and no credit was spared to ensure this impenetrable titan had the agility to match its firepower. This was the deadliest spaceship that money could buy. It continued drifting and then turned to face the direction of the EIB. The pilot sent out a video message through the game and through the forums. The video was titled, "The Confessions of an EIB CEO." The username he used was Dentara Rust. It was a name the detective had briefly come across in his prior investigations, but now he knew with utmost certainty that this mysterious stranger was Callie. The blocky bitrate made it difficult to assign any distinct features to the bank robber who now commanded the most lethal ship in all of EVE Online. An average-looking white male sporting close-cropped hair sat in a dimly lit room that gave everything in the webcam an orange tinge.
This is an official announcement from Callie of the EIB.
He greeted the EVE Online community with an air of business casual familiarity, the formalities betrayed by the smug grin filling his face, capable of being seen despite the poor camera quality.
Just to let you all know, yes, it was a scam. Sorry about that.
He offhandedly apologized like a friend who accidentally bumped into you at the pub and caused you to spill a bit of your drink, not as the guy who robbed his own bank of 800 billion interstellar credits mere moments ago. The man everyone knew as Callie continued in this manner for 16 minutes. He laid bare his plans from the start. Callie's intent was legitimate. The EIB was founded with 100 million of his own credits. It was making money and players were paid back with due diligence, but it was a Ponzi scheme. He was using the money from new investors to pay off older investors. The bank's records were fraudulent, but seeing as this was one of the first space banks in EVE Online, there were no space bank regulators to stop him. That is, until the detective wouldn't leave well enough alone. Callie tolerated the targeted doubt, but found it tiring to fend them off and continue making the EIB appear legitimate as the months went on. The bus crash, like the detective assumed, was indeed made up, but Callie didn't think the detective was willing to pursue it to the extent of calling the hospital. Callie gleefully explained the phone number was a red herring set up so the detective could run into Peter. Callie then introduced Peter on camera.
Hey man, I don't know what's going on, Mike, but...
He scrunched his face and put on the voice the detective had heard before while talking to who he assumed to be Callie's caretaker. The detective couldn't believe it. He had been so close to uncovering the truth but lacked anything substantial to expose the man who sat there mocking him. Perhaps if he hadn't meddled, he wouldn't have provoked Callie's heist. Unlikely. The video continued and Callie seemed to relish in his own mischief. He believed the only people to blame were the players themselves. At the end of the space day, they were the ones who gave him the money. But the lion's share of the stolen credits belonged to the fat cats, as Callie put it. The corporations that used their resources to force the smaller players into compliance. The EIB still had enough assets for the directors to sell off and repay the common folk of EVE Online. Only the rich would suffer, as Callie used the bulk of their money to pay for the colossal space fighter he was sitting in. The rest of the money Callie used to place a bounty on his own character's head. He was giving everyone a sporting chance to come reclaim their own money. In a fit of rage, the players reported Callie to the developers, but CCP Games found that he had done nothing wrong. He didn't hack anyone's accounts, he didn't break terms of service or the end-user license agreement. As Callie put it, the players were the ones who handed him the money. Callie's method embodied and exaggerated the no-holds-barred approach of EVE Online. He set a precedent, and scammers are as much a part of today's community as honest prospectors, ruthless corporate entities, and thieving pirates. Before he logged off, Callie encouraged the players to build their worth in whatever they saw fit.
Because I will be probably doing another scam in about 6 months' time.
I'm not sure if he ever made good on his promise, but it's a haunting detail that floats through my mind every time I see a new scam break Callie's old record. Did he return to one-up himself? Maybe people should store their money in space mattresses instead.